Oh, hey, CNFers. I'm going to have a promo code for the 2026 Power of Narrative conference in Boston coming soon. Should give you a nice little discount. Teasing a discount. I might use it myself so I can save a few bucks. No, I don't get commissions and kickbacks or a free lunch. I'm not that savvy. This podcast is sponsored by the newsletter Pitch Club, the monthly Substack where you read cold pitches, ideally cold. I mean, some might be a little lukewarm, but whatever. And hear the authors audio annotate their thinking behind how they sold and crafted their pitches, how to pitch an agent, an editor, a feature, an essay, a source. Welcome to pitchclub.substack.com. Forever free. Read a little, listen a little, learn a lot.
The cervix is open. There's no going back.
Oh, hey, CNFers. It's the Creative Nonfiction Podcast, the show where I speak to tellers of true tales about the true tales they tell, how they go about the work, and how shitty we feel. I'm Brendan O'Meara, the host nobody asked for, but maybe the one you need. If you want to check out Neiman's storyboard, Kim H. Cross had me annotate a chapter of The Frontrunner. She also featured ya boy in her waterproof notebook Substack, in case you're not sick of me yet. And why would you be? Remember, when journalism was a good career, me neither. Today we have Jane Marie Chen, author of Like a Wave We Break, a memoir of falling apart and finding myself. It's published by Harmony. It's a book whose ancestor is very clearly Eat, Pray, Love. It's a story of the cost of achievement and ambition, how childhood trauma permeates deep into adulthood, and the long, nonlinear road to healing. I'm kicking myself for not asking Jane a question I had written down and I had forgotten about. She had very privileged access to an army of healers, some very famous ones, and I meant to ask her how she'd counsel people with lesser means on how to approach their healing if they want to embark on a similar journey or start the journey. As much as I fucking hate that word journey these days, the band's okay, but the whole journey industrial complex, bleh. That's my bad. Copping to that right now. Show notes and off-kilter blogs are at BrendanO'Meara.com. Hey, if you care to support the show with a few dollars and cents, you can visit patreon.com/CNFpod for a host of cool perks, like the Flash 52 sessions. And in your 10th Flash session with me, I will edit a Flash essay for you and give you notes. I have a little punch card for everybody. It's pretty... For all the frequent flyers, I actually have little punch cards like you get at your coffee shop. The show's Instagram is at Creative Nonfiction Podcast. Blah. We got a new patron. She from Australia. She named Kelly. Thank you very much for coming aboard, Kelly. I used to read the full names of people just as a means of shout-outs, but now I realize that's probably bad practice because who knows what fucking weirdos are out there. Actually, we do know. We just don't know. We do know, but we don't know. You know what I mean. So I'll give the shout-outs to new patrons with just the first name. Okay? Thank you, Kelly. Free ways to support the show are leaving kind reviews for either the podcast and The Frontrunner. I got a nice, lovely review for the podcast. Let me read it and give this shout its proper outs. It's from Endaistermaro. I don't know. Indispensable, 5 stars. The CNF pod is great fun. Crucial insights into writing nonfiction from a pool of excellent writers who know their stuff. Must listen, not only for aspiring nonfiction writers, but for working, successful ones too. This is the community you're looking for. And ain't that sweet? Thank you very much, Endaistermaro, Yestermaro. Maybe that's it. Yestermaro. Doesn't matter. All that matters is that I'm deeply grateful that you took the time to do that and help validate the show for the wayward CNFer. So Jane, being the entrepreneur she is, has quite the ecosystem around her memoir. At her website, janemariechen.com, there's a self-worth quiz, and I don't feel like failing, so I'm not going to take it. If I can't copy off the smart kid, then why take the test, right? She does speaking and leadership coaching and workshops on building resilience, and she recently delivered a TED Talk about resilience that you can find at TED on YouTube. I will embed it in the show notes. Wow. save you a trip. Jane is the former CEO and co-founder of Embrace Global, which developed infant incubators that look like these little tiny sleeping bags. And it helped more than 1 million babies, saved hundreds of thousands of lives, many of which would have died without this technology. She was recognized as Forbes Impact 30 and received the Economist Innovation Award, Fast Company Innovation Award, and the World Economic Forum Social Entrepreneur of the Year Award. She has an MBA from Stanford and a master's in public administration from Harvard. Didn't I just have some clown on the show who studied at Yale and Harvard? Like, what the fuck am I doing? If I don't feel inadequate, I don't feel alive, man. You can learn more about Jane at janemariecchen.com and follow her, let's just say on the gram, at janemarie.chen. In this podcast, we talk about how she wrote the book to help people, the importance of surfing in her life, what is enough, burnout, writing the visceral, zooming in, zooming out, playing with timelines, working with a collaborative writer. That was news to me. I should have known that, but I didn't know she had a co-writer. Writing to leave the past in the past and not wanting to write a prescriptive memoir. Some pretty rich shit, man. Parting shot on, fuck if I know. So let's cue up the montage. Here's Jane Marie Chen.
Am I allowed to swear, by the way?
Oh, yes.
Oh, okay. Are you just fucking insane?
Just kind of a sloppy person.
No, I'm still such a fuck up. I'm going to be a fuck up probably for the rest of my life.
This is going to have to interest somebody somewhere other than me.
What are some memoirs you drew inspiration from, or other books you drew inspiration from to see you through to the finish line, or at least inspire you to get started?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, let's see. There's a few. Actually, some of the folks that I worked with, including my agent, who's also an author, Laura Love. She wrote a book called The Many Lives of Mama Love, which I absolutely love that book. It's such a beautiful memoir. And so reading books like that really inspired me. Of course, books like Educated, Glass Castle, Eat, Pray, Love from All the Way in the Day. I feel like my story is akin to that in a way, but with a surfboard and a healing journey. So yeah, those are some of the books.
Yeah, and when what was it about them in particular that resonated with you?
I just loved the spirit of, I think, adventure, in the Eat, Pray, Love story that I read so many years, like 20 years ago. And there's something about bringing together both moments that, are very profound and tender with humor and being able to bring that all together. I think Laura does that so beautifully in her memoir as well. And then, I think some other books just writing about like the way people wrote about difficult experiences, just kind of learning from that, and the vulnerability around that was really helpful.
When you're like sitting down to write, it always helps to have some degree of a practice, a routine of sorts. Some people can be kind of willy-nilly about it, and I find that it's helpful to have more structure around that. I wonder for you, like, what is the kind of practice that you've abided when you're looking to generate pages?
Let's see. I really found it was important to just set aside like a block of time that I could really get into the flow. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like writing really requires your full focus and your creative brain to be online. And for a lot of the work I do, like professionally with my company, that's more like my task-oriented brain. So I'm like quickly shifting from one thing to the next and just kind of taking things off my task list. Whereas with writing, I needed to be in a more like expansive space. And so what I really found helpful was just like blocking off at least 5 or 6 hours certain days where I could do that. And then finding places that were really inspiring to me. And I actually did a lot of writing in Hawaii, which is looking at the ocean and being around the ocean is just really helpful for me to get into like a calm creative space. And it's actually why I ultimately ended up moving to Hawaii 2 years ago.
Yeah. How important is the ocean and the water to you?
Oh, it's everything. It's like my greatest healer, teacher, all of it. And so I'm in the water almost every day. Now in warm water, before I was in very cold water in California. So I'm happy I don't have to wear a wetsuit anymore. But it's just such a healing process for me. And I surf, I'm obsessed with surfing. So that's just something I do as a physical sport, but it also is a life philosophy in many ways. And I have this practice now where after my surf sessions every day, I float and I take a moment to slow down. I just feel the embrace of the water and I watch the clouds change shape. I listen to the sand, the sound of the sand beneath me as it moves around on the ocean floor. So it's that moment of really pausing, finding stillness, being in total presence. I feel like that is actually what helps me to get to a creative space.
Yeah, I've read a lot about surfing. Bill Finnegan. Oh my God, I'm
William
blanking on
Finnegan,
his-
yes.
Yeah, his Barbarian Days, which is like just an amazing book, and like a lot of people write so eloquently about surfing, and what is it about surfing that is so that maybe it draws obsessives and is just an obsession unto itself, really.
Well, I think there's many things. There's just the act of riding a wave is so fun. There's nothing more freeing or enjoyable. It like literally feels like you're flying. And so it's just really just pure joy and play. That's part of it. And then it's so challenging, right? It's like it's the only sport, if you think about it, where your medium is constantly shifting. Like no two waves are the same. Waves don't really break in the exact same place. And so, in a 2 hour session, if you had a good session, the total amount of time you're actually on a wave if let's say you catch 10 waves, right, in a 2 hour session, maybe you're on waves for 30 seconds. That's what it kind of amounts to.
Yeah.
And so the time you're on the wave is actually very, very little. So what that means is the rest of the time, what are you doing? Well, you're observing, you're taking in the ocean, you're understanding its patterns. Like surfing is just as much about understanding as it is about doing. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. And so that's really interesting. And then it's, this idea of variable rewards, like you never know when the wave's going to show up. And so it's got this like addictive nature, but it's just like one of these sports that's so, so challenging and hard to master that you're constantly learning. And I think that's what makes it so addictive as well. It's just like you're always wanting to learn, progress, and then the reward is that you get to fly.
Yeah, that sounds a lot like writing, doesn't it?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I've never made that parallel. But yeah, I could see parts of that. Yeah.
I'm just thinking if you're sitting in a writing session for, let's say, 2 hours and you can really catch on something that is get that flow state is such a small fraction of the entire time that you're in that pocket. And there is a lot of surrendering to things that are around you, and like you don't know what's coming, and no two sessions are alike. But you try to control what you can control, but eventually you do have to just kind of surrender to the elements.
Yes. I guess the difference is you're not going to face plant when you are writing.
Yeah, that's When you were like when you start a writing project, like where did you seek the degree of inspiration that would kind of sustain you over the course of an entire project?
It was interesting because someone had approached me to write a book years ago. There had been a piece about my work in the New York Times with the company I started, which builds baby incubators for preemies. And at the time, I was like, I'd never even thought about writing a book. And I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Kind of sat with me, but then I didn't pursue it. And then, all these things happened with my company nearly shut down. I went on this like intense global healing journey. And at the end of it, I thought, oh my gosh, that's the story I want to tell. Then it felt right. And so I think I felt inspired to tell a story that could really help people. And I think that's what like kind of kept me going the whole time, was having that true north. Like, why are you doing this?
Mm-hmm.
Why are you writing this? right? And every time I felt frustrated, I'd come back to, okay, this is what this is in service of. In fact, I even wrote like just like a 2-page letter to myself about what the intention for the book was. And that was incredibly helpful.
Yeah, that gets to, this idea of, writing a memoir can feel very self-indulgent. I would task anyone to write it, but it's another thing to write it and then want to publish it. And then you have to start thinking like, well, what's this for? What is it really for?
Yeah.
Not that you have it in front of you, but what were those intentions in that letter you wrote for yourself? So this thing had something of it was of service.
Yeah, it was of service. I really felt like, my story is about this. It's the story of my company and building the company and the impact that was made. But more importantly, it's the story of what happened when it all came crumbling down 10 years in. And that sent me on a healing journey in which I finally had to confront some really difficult things from my childhood. I had grown up with a lot of violence in my childhood. And I had never connected the dots that it was feeling so powerless throughout my childhood. That's what had motivated me to help the most powerless people in the world. But it had also driven me to work in such unhealthy ways, just to the point of complete burnout, such that at that 10-year mark, I had a complete mental and physical breakdown. Coming out of that, I learned so much. And my intention was to share everything I'd learned with others who had been through similar challenges so that they could find hope and healing and self-compassion. And I think it's for these individuals, but on a broader level, I started to think about like what is happening in our society. And we live in such a fractured world today. So often we can operate from a place of fear and ego and control, right? When we don't address or acknowledge some of the wounds that are driving us. When we do that, when we can learn to have self-compassion, actually, then we can treat others with compassion more easily. We can extend that outwards. Then we can act from a place of love and shared purpose. And so I started to just connect all these dots, and it made me feel like, gosh, this is a story that I want to tell because I think it can help both at an individual and at a societal level. And I think this is the most important work I'm going to do in my life.
The irony of that so we've never been more connected, really, in a sense. But you said that we're never been more fractured at the same time.
Totally. Yeah. And it's like, I think we're connected kind of on this surface level, but we're not deeply connected. And so loneliness, even though we're so connected, the feeling of loneliness is so pervasive, and I think people are just can be very self-righteous, myself included at times, but that we stand firm in our views. And so we just are in this society right now where we're more and more polarized. And again, I think when we start to and there's research on self-compassion that shows this, that when we have that compassion for ourselves, we are also more willing to listen to other points of view. We're willing to be more humble. There's something really beautiful about this practice. And this is what I learned in my journey, that I was so hard on myself. And what I saw was that I was acting from a place of like, even though I cared so much about my mission, but also I just never believed that I was enough. And so I had to constantly do more and more and more. And the goalpost kept moving to the point where I just burned out, and I'm proud to say that Embrace today, we've helped over 1 million babies. But I did not do that in a sustainable way because I completely burned out in the process. And so now that I have these tools to care for myself better, I think I can make greater impact in the long run.
Yeah. This hyper achievement is, so, sort of tethered to really your origin story in this. It was just like, it was the way to find worth, a way to be seen. And especially in our sort of hyper capitalistic culture too, it's like achieve.
Yes.
And it's just like, what is you can speak to this personally. Like, what is the damage of this constant sort of hedonic achievement that's always changing? Like you said, the goalposts keep moving.
Yeah, well, I think this is why part of what's driving this mental health crisis, right? We see burnout and anxiety levels are at epidemic levels today. I mean, it's crazy when you look at the
Yeah.
statistics. So, well, why is that happening? And I think this is what's happening is like our whole sense of worth is predicated on external success, right? So everything
Yeah.
from what we achieve to what we look like. And I think social media is just further amplifying this.
Oh, yeah.
So we think we have to do a certain thing or look a certain way or get, X number of likes on TikTok or Instagram or whatever, like that's going to make us feel worthy. So then our sense of self becomes so fragile because it's dictated on things that we cannot control. Right. Whereas I think when we start to look inward and we start to understand, oh, I have innate worthiness that's not tethered to my external success, then we have this grounding. And you know what? When we have that grounding, it gives us the courage to take more risks, actually, right? Because if we go out there and do something and if we fail, God forbid, like we're going to be okay because we have that inner sense of worthiness. And I think it allows for greater connection and it allows us to live by our values instead of what we think everyone else is going to approve of. And so I just really think that's fundamental to all of us living healthier lives.
Right. Well, and you grew up with a certain set of values and then had to really reconcile, your changing values and your maturation around it. So just how did what was that central tension of, how you grew up versus what you matured into?
Yeah, well, I think so much of my upbringing was about seeing my achievements as the way to earn love. I wouldn't have known how to articulate that when I was younger, but
Yeah.
that's kind of what I was trained. Like if you succeed, if you're successful, if you achieve, then you're worthy, then you're loved, right? And so in many ways, I went against the grain of what my parents wanted. They really wanted me, I'm a first generation Taiwanese American immigrant. They really wanted me to be a doctor or to get, a big corporate job. And instead, I went into the nonprofit world. I started a social enterprise. I moved to India to do this work. Like it was very much against, and they were not against what they wanted, and they were not happy with my decisions. But I felt very strongly about my work, and it was purpose-driven work. And so I went after it. However, even within that I felt like I needed to make that a success. And maybe in some ways the pressure was even higher because I'd gone against what my family wanted. And so there's an even bigger pressure to make sure that it was successful, And so it's multifaceted. It's like I cared so much about my work and I wanted it so badly to have a certain outcome. And so when we came across so many challenges, I mean, we were doing, and when I think back now, just like one of the hardest things in the world, probably, we're developing a brand new product, an incubator for babies, trying to serve the poorest communities in the world, with a medical device that initially none of us had any experience doing this. So we were just like, we took on a huge, enormous task and did it in some of the hardest places in the world to operate in. And so, of course, we were going to hit so many challenges, but I took each of those as like a personal failure almost. And I just worked myself to death. Like especially those first couple years living in India, I never took a weekend off. I worked 15-hour days. I was just on all the time. And by, I would say like 4 years in, I was wiped, but I couldn't stop. And so at 10 years in, like I said, I really broke down. I was having panic attacks. I was depressed. Like I didn't even know I was capable of getting to such a fragile state. And so my hope is that no one has to get to that point. And that's part of what this book is about.
Yeah, well, and Seth Godin writes about sunk costs a lot. And I suspect that when you've invested so much of your time and money and resources and energy into something, be it a year or 10 years, the idea of quitting is it's antithetical. You're like, oh my God, what all that time you spent, all that money, all the expectations, your identity and a sense of failure is so tethered, and success is so tethered to that thing. It's it's
right.
really hard to break from that. It's just, how did you end up breaking from that?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. It wasn't just about success. It was that my identity was wrapped up in this thing. I was the incubator lady, like, right? Like with every award or, press coverage or whatever, I was like, my identity was getting more and more intertwined with this thing. I didn't know where I began and the company ended, right? It was just
Yeah.
all so enmeshed. And so you asked how I separated from that. Well, I didn't have a choice. I was forced to do that when the company shut down. And basically, we just kept facing one challenge after the next, after the next. And eventually, we ran out of funding and like we had to shut down the company. So I didn't have a choice at that point. And I was devastated. It really was like rock bottom for me, right? I'd poured a decade of my heart and soul at that point into this work. And so that's kind of what, at that point of despair, I thought, I have to get away from everything to find myself again. And so that's what set me off on a healing journey. I booked a one-way ticket to Indonesia and I thought, I'm just going to go surf. I'm going to try every healing modality I could find, and then we'll see what happens. And when I look back now, and this was 2018 that happened. So like 8 years ago. When I look back now, it was the greatest gift of my life. Hitting rock bottom was truly the biggest gift of my life, because if that hadn't happened, I would have never gone on the journey I went on to really understand what had been driving me, to finally establish a sense of deeper self-love and self-compassion and worthiness, and just all of the things I needed to put in place to find happiness in the long run, right? And then that enabled me to write this book. So my whole life changed at that point. I would have never wished that on anybody, and I could not have ever seen that in the moment. It's been really cool to actually launch the book and think back to that moment in 2018 where I'm sitting in my living room and I'm just in like complete despair to 8 years later, like launching the book, giving a TED talk about the subject, and then really being able to help other people through the message. And that, I would say, has been the most rewarding part of this journey. Like I get notes almost every day from someone who says, thank you for sharing your story, and here's how it's helped me. And every time I hear that, I'm like, okay, yes, like I did the right thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what was it like for you having to revisit so much of the sort of the original trauma of your childhood, and even just through your young adulthood of embrace and the ups and downs of that, having to go back into the swamp of it and relive it in a lot of ways? What was that like?
It was really hard. I think the childhood stuff, especially, because I always say this, I think to be a good writer, you have to really get into the visceral parts of the experience, right? You have to bring someone into that experience with you, which requires you to go back and like really understand every detail, every memory, all of like the visceral aspects of the experience, the sounds, the smells, like everything that was happening. And so when you're doing that with some difficult memories, like there would be days where I just like cry every day. That's why it's so helpful for me to get in the ocean and cleanse and just like try to soothe myself. But there were days that was like very, 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 very hard. And the thing about writing is when you're putting these difficult experiences on the page, you can't run away from it anymore. Right? It's like staring you in the face over and over and over again. And so it was beautiful and cathartic all at the same time. And then the other thing writing does, you zoom in and then you zoom out, right? So it also helps you to look at your life from this 30,000 foot level and see, okay, here are how all the pieces connected. And in my own story, in my writing, I really wanted to understand my parents' stories and the story of my ancestors, really. And so I go back into the history of Taiwan, the history of Japan, all the things that happened that led to my parents having the upbringings they did, and then ultimately moving us to America. And so that was really deeply impactful for me to understand, like, these are all the things that got me to this point. And it actually gave me a great deal of compassion for my parents and for my family. And so I'm so grateful. It's very interesting. Bessel van der Kolk is the author of The Body Keeps the Score, and he's someone I've had the great fortune to work with. I write a lot about him in the book. One of the things Bessel says about trauma or the way trauma works in the brain is that the way you heal from trauma is when your brain can finally put the past in the past, right? That we relive our trauma when we recall an experience and we have kind of all the same physiological responses that we had back then. We have them in the present today. So it's the way you bring the past into the present. And healing happens when you can keep the past in the past, when you can acknowledge, yeah, that was difficult. It was really hard and it happened back then.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something about writing that allows you to do that, right? That you relive it, you rehash it, you go into all the details, you start to connect how all the pieces came together. And then ultimately you get to this point where you're like, okay, that was in the past. I've written about it in these 6 chapters. Now we're going to move on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's on the other side of it, sometimes writing it, I've kept a journal for, gosh, almost 30 years now. Like I've just had almost a daily journal for that long. Sometimes I feel like the various degrees of negative self-talk that I've engaged in over the years, and it's just in my nature, unfortunately. But I feel like sometimes writing it and being true and authentic, even in the privacy of my own pages, is almost ossifying that behavior and not leaving certain things in the past, and then I constantly relive things over and over again. And I wonder, just for you, like, this is great. Like you know, the writing was a great exercise in leaving that behind and keeping the past in the past. But did you wrestle with maybe the fact of like making it archival, writing it down in a sense was imprinting it more? If that makes any sense.
Yeah. For me, it wasn't. I think there's probably a process where, that can happen initially and it's one of those things you kind of have to stay with. And the more I think the more you kind of stay with it, yeah, I don't know. I mean, honestly, I was also doing a lot of therapy at that time, so that was helping me to process in another way. And then I think like what I said was really helpful in terms of like having the combination of going back and rehashing, but then like taking a step back and seeing, okay, where is my life today? And what are the things that have happened between now and then that have allowed me to kind of see things in a different way? And so I would say one really important part of that is not just like the rehashing of the details, but then like really kind of reflecting, like kind of making sense of all of what happened, right? And being able to maybe put a new lens on that. So right, so it's not just about the rehashing of details, but like one of the things I said earlier was if I were just to rewrite what happened in 2018, for just as an example of when my company was shutting down, it was just like, it was awful. I felt terrible. Like I said, I was having panic attacks. I was in this like really, really dark place. And if I just kept writing about that moment, yeah, that would feel like it kind of sucked, right? But when I can look at it from the lens of today and I can see, oh, wow, actually, my biggest challenges became the biggest gifts in my life. Even what I experienced as a child, which was so difficult, that ultimately led me to start my company because, as I said, I was feeling so powerless through my childhood, really gave me that drive to help the most powerless people. And so, one of the teachers I had a chance to learn from was Tony Robbins. And he's this great quote. He says, life happens for you, not to you. Right. And so when I started to take that lens and I could see, okay, how did those challenges and difficult moments actually end up becoming my greatest teachers and gifts? Then I could see it in like a totally new way.
Hmm. A moment ago, you said something, hey, how you basically found the compassion for your parents too through this generational trauma. How did you go from the anger and the resentment to finding that compassion?
I think it was like a bunch of things. One was like really understanding their histories, the way they grew up. I mean, I think that shapes so many of us. And so understanding the history of Taiwan, where I was born, Taiwan was under martial law for 38 years.
Mm.
That's the Taiwan my parents were born into. And in that time, hundreds of thousands of people were killed, raped, imprisoned for no reason. There was just complete oppression on every level, right? And so I started to understand, wow, this is the way violence trickles into societies. into family systems and into my own family. And so I really saw from kind of a historical perspective what was happening, the way that they were raised, the things that they were trying to do their best in many ways. And they also showed love. And that's something I really wanted to show in this book. When I set out to write it, I thought, I want to portray every character with love and compassion. That was really, really important to me. And I want to tell the truth. So how do you do both of those things simultaneously, right? And we know that no one is all bad or all good. We're all very complicated people. And so that's something I felt really important to write as I characterized my parents and my family, to write about all the aspects of them, how incredibly generous and caring my father could be, but how he could also get really angry, and how those exist simultaneously. And I think we all can relate to that, right? There's all these different facets of our personality. And so that was really important for me to show, that it was not all bad or all good, but just really complicated and
Yeah.
messy. And that is the human experience. Yeah.
Yeah, well, writing about family can be very tricky in that regard. So, like, how did you strike that balance of, trying to write truthfully and transparently, but also, guarding them, from being just completely and totally eviscerated, by their child or, and your sisters as
Yeah.
well?
Like I said, that was like my intent. So it was really great to have that intent up front. It was the thing that worried me the most, because I'm writing about, some really difficult experiences. And so that's why I really tried to, like, as I wrote about the difficult things, like really stay with the facts, meaning like what I was feeling, what I was experiencing, not really attribute anything to intentions. Like my parents did this because they were mean or evil or what. There's none of that in the book. When you read it, it's really just sticking to like what was my experience in the moment. Maybe the ways that I try to kind of make sense of that, but then showing like also like the full characters of people, right? And so you'll see just a lot of like tender, loving moments in there as well. So I think it was that. It was like speaking the truth in terms of what I experienced, and then trying to connect the dots in terms of like the way it affected me, the way I made sense of it, but not really attributing like what was someone's intention, because I know my parents weren't trying to harm me. That was never their intention. And then portraying the fullness of their characters. So that was how I went about it.
Yeah, and when you're writing the book and you're deciding what to keep in and keep out, what was doing the math of what stays in the book and maybe what was in early drafts and came out? How did you make those decisions as you were, say, rewriting the book too?
That's a good question. That was really, my literary agent was so helpful in that. And I had a collaborative writer as well who was incredible. And so we would go through and try to understand, like, there's so many chapters that didn't make it into the book, but we try to figure out like what is really serving the arc of the story, right?
Yeah.
What is helping to generate momentum, and what are the stories or the details that allow for that character development. So there's like a lot of things that didn't make the story, unfortunately, and we had to be like just really thoughtful about what to cut and what to keep in. It's a pretty long book, although I think it's a fairly fast read. And so a lot of it was just kind of in service of like what helps the story come alive, what builds momentum, what helps to bring the readers into the story, what helps to like paint these characters, as I said, as like full people. What were the moments that like truly had meaning for me? Like one of the things I write about, for example, is my psychedelic experiences. Those are really, really, really hard to write about. And we went back and forth on that, my collaborative writer. And she's like, this is really hard, because it's almost like, it's why writing about dreams is so hard, because you're in someone's internal landscape, but those experiences were like incredibly meaningful to me. And so I really felt like I wanted to include them, and we did ultimately. And I've gotten good feedback on them, but like it was just like that was the thing I had to figure out, like what was really meaningful to me, and then if the purpose of this book is to help people, what are the things in here that are going to help people? And what I wanted was like, the reason I chose to write a memoir and not a self-help book is because I wanted to write a story that was not prescriptive.
Mhm.
I don't think like there's a one size fits all for healing. So I think the best thing I could do is say, here is my experience. And I wrote stories that people could take something away from, right? Stories that I felt like were universal, where we've all had these moments of feeling like we're not enough, or we've all had a bad relationship experience, or, whatever it is. And so I tried to write the stories I felt could be, very universal, where people could take something away from that, but in a way that was not like, okay, reader, I'm telling you what to do here and go about it like this. It was more, this is just my experience, and take from it what resonates with you.
Yeah. When did the shape of the book really start to coalesce for you?
That's funny. It changed a lot. So in the beginning, when I first gave my proposal to my agent, she was like, it was such a funny story, actually. So someone had made the introduction and she read it, and she was actually just gonna like wish me well and give me a couple tips and whatever. But then we sat down, this was during COVID, and I had just come out of a frog poisoning ceremony. I'm not gonna go into that. You have to read the book to see what happens there. But anyway, so I had all these
through
like,
so many.
yeah, I go through
things
like
in this
everything. So anyway, I had just burned like 14 holes in my leg. And so I had all these like little scars. And so we're having coffee and we kind of get to the end of the conversation. And I forgot how this came up, but I like showed her these 14 holes in my leg. And she was like so intrigued and fascinated. And I remember the next day she called me and she was like, okay, Jane, I am going to do a book with you. I'm going to bring a book into this world with you, but it's not the book you want. And if you're open to that, then I'll work with you. And I was like, yes, anything. Like I just knew I wanted to work with her. So she was like, at first it was like, had even more of the business story and more of the embrace story. And she was like, I want you to consolidate all of that into like one chapter or two chapters, And so it was like, oh my God, I'll try. And so anyway, we agreed to do this. Like she agreed to represent me. And so then we started working on like, what is the story here? Right. And at the end, we came to a happy medium. I did not consolidate and break. It's too much of my life. I could not get into one or two chapters. It's about, I would say, a quarter of the book, right? So it's not insignificant, but it's not the whole book. And then we started working on like, what is the arc of the story? Like, what do we want to tell after that? Right. And how do we want to tell it? And I went through so many healing experiences, like not all of them made the book, maybe 20% of them made the book. And so we had to just figure out like, what are the ones that like are interesting, impactful? How do we tell those in a way that, it's like not overly intellectual. So people are still getting something away from it, but you don't have to tell like every single thing, So it was hard. And then writing about, I would say, yeah, some of the stories like of the scenes of violence were really hard. So I had to be thoughtful about what to include there. The thing that was the hardest, I would say, was how the timeline. Meaning, do we tell this book chronologically as events happened? Or do we kind of shift timelines back and forth? And so we played with that a lot. We even played with a structure where every chapter rotated between the past, my childhood, and the present. But we're working with three timelines in the book. There's the embrace story, the story of my company. There's my childhood story. Then there's my healing story. So how do we bring all of those together in a way that's compelling? And so I think we ended up in a good place, but that was one of the hardest parts of writing the book.
Yeah, there's a moment early in the book that stuck out to me, and it might have been an artifact of maybe a past structure. I think it ends. Chapter 6 ends, and you're still a child, but then chapter 7 starts, and you're 21, and it's just like, oh, there's a big jump there, and I think that's probably an artifact of you messing around with the chronology.
Yeah. And we wanted to, so like I thought about putting sections in the book, which some people did. We chose not to, and I'm glad we chose not to. But instead what we try to do was when there is a shift to kind of have a chapter end in a way that okay, the next chapter there's going to be a time jump and a shift, right? So for example, I go to Indonesia, right? And that marks the end of embrace and the beginning of the healing journey. And so in the chapter before that, to kind of show the reader, okay, we're moving into a new space now. I think the way we ended, I don't have the exact words in front of me, but I basically learned about this healer named Papa. He's like a foot reflexologist who like beats the shit out of your foot and he heals you, right? In Indonesia. And so I learned about him, and I end that chapter by saying like something like, I was willing to like do anything to fix myself. And that belief would shape everything that came next, right? And so we do try to use these subtle ways to kind of say, okay, now we're moving into the next section of the book.
And you go through so many different healing modalities that just in the book alone, you said that only like really scrapes the surface in a lot of ways. Did you run into, just in your own lived and personal experience, that you were jumping from one to the next, maybe like almost too quickly, like not giving one a chance over another?
Yeah, sometimes it was like, and so we have a chapter called Spaghetti on the Wall, because it was just like, I'm going to just do everything. I had my spreadsheet. I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. If this doesn't feel right, I'm going to do this and that. And I'd learn about, something new, and I'd try that. And I was just like, at one point I had 3 therapists at the same time because I was trying 3 different types of therapy. Like I was crazy, and I'm very intense. So, it makes sense. But yeah. But it was a lot. It was a lot, and it was hard to write about. And it's very interesting because for people who are not interested in the healing journey, okay, look, healing is not linear. That's something very hard to capture, right? The building of the company was far more linear. It goes from like A to B to C, and of course we had these huge setbacks and da da da. Healing is like a very, very different kind of thing. And so I have made the mistake of reading some of the Goodreads reviews on my book. And most of them are quite positive, but there's a few people who are like, well, I really love the embrace story, but I felt like the healing story was like a little slower. Well, first of all, if you're not into like hearing that kind of story, then this book isn't going to be for you. But also, one of the things I was intentionally trying to show was the non-linear nature of this work. It's not a tidy path. It's not a neat bow. You make progress and you think, oh, I'm healed. And then you realize, oh gosh, I'm really not. And then you try something else. And so that was actually quite intentional to show people like, here's like the real life version, not the fairy tale version of how this goes.
Yeah, I love the line where you had the Avengers of trauma support.
Yeah,
and I just love the imagery of that. It's just like everyone has their own little strengths and their own voice, and it's a matter of like locking into which one, or maybe all 6 of them are gonna help contribute in some meaningful way.
Right. And that's the thing I ultimately wanted to show too, that like each of these things, yes, I got something really meaningful out of each teacher, each experience. Like that was all there. But it wasn't until I learned to have that love for myself that everything gelled. And of course, that's what all of this was bringing me to. But ultimately, all the answers I was seeking for in the world, and through every healing modality, all of that, I really had to find within myself. And that is like the only sustainable way to find healing, is that we find those answers within ourselves. But I couldn't have done that without going through the whole journey.
Yeah, when you're writing the book, we all hit a wall at some point. There's a honeymoon period of any start of these projects, and then eventually the reality hits, and you're like, I don't know how many dead books out there that are like 23 pages long, and people are just like, fuck this. I'm done with this. But, to be a writer, to be a pro, you push through and you finish. So when you hit those walls and that doubt, the sluggishness that happens in the middle of a project, to see it through, how did you push through?
Yeah. Well, luckily, as I said, I had like such a great support team. I had a collaborative writer. I had my agent. I mean, there were moments where I'd like, especially towards the end, where I'd call my agent and be like, should we just pull the plug on this thing? Like it's not too late. It's not in the world yet. I actually told that to my therapist. And this was like right before the book came out. And he said to me, this is Bessel van der Kolk, and he goes, the cervix is open. There's no going back.
Oh, no.
was like cracking up. But yeah, there are those moments where you kind of hit a wall. And honestly, there were moments where I just had to take a break and put it down for like weeks, maybe even a month, really. Like there are
Yeah.
moments I could write every day and I get in the flow and I feel great. And there are moments where I was like, okay, I can't look at this for a while. So I think just taking those breaks is really important and building that in and knowing like you don't have to write every single day. I mean, some people do. I didn't. And it helped me to, to not have to do that every day. And then, like I said, I think writing really comes from like flow state, creative state. So, and that's counter to a timeline and goals. And like, I have to get this many pages done by this time. So I would actually say you could keep your goals very broad, but the more you can move away from that, almost, I think the better. You asked earlier too about like what were some rituals. Actually, for me, music was really important.
Mm.
And there's certain songs that I would play or soundtracks that would like really kind of get me into, again, switch my brain from the over intellectual part to more music and poetry and right, the more creative part of my brain. And then when I was in that state, like certain chapters or structures, I remember the epilogue just like all came to me in one sitting. And I was like, I just had and I had a vision for it. Like I could see the waves coming in and I just had this whole like vision for it. And a lot of the best scenes in the book, I think, were like that. Like it was almost like I could see the movie, and then I took those images and then I translated them into words.
What was the relationship and the partnership between you and the collaborative writer? How did you work together?
Oh, it was so awesome. Yeah, Nina was my collaborative writer. I think these work in different ways, but for some of it, like Nina, I would tell her stuff and she would write stuff and then, I would review it and we go back and forth in that way. And then other parts of the book, I would say for like a good chunk of the book, like I would write and then I would send it to my collaborative writer and she would take it and like help, I'm not a professional writer. So it was really helpful to have her help me like reshape or recraft or polish the language into something more beautiful. And then we would kind of go back and forth like that. So it was like truly a collaborative process. And I really, really appreciated and enjoyed that. I mean, of course, there's like very frustrating moments. I feel like, gosh, I know her now. She knows me now better than anyone in my life. Like she had to watch therapy videos and, hear about every single part of my life. And so at this point, she's a sister to me, but it was just like such a cool process to get to do that with someone. And I there's no way I could have done this on my own. So I feel very, very lucky to have had that experience.
Yeah. What was a great lesson or two or three that you took from that? Not being like let's say a classically trained writer, not, and then coming into this and writing the book with that partner, what have you learned so that you can like parlay that into the next one so it feels maybe a bit more skilled or elevated?
I learned a lot of I would say through this process, I feel like again, I'm not a professional writer, but I feel like I became a much better writer through this process. And some of the things I learned were, for example, I've never written anything that long. I've written a couple articles here and there, but nothing like this. And so one of the things that I feel like I really wanted a book where people feel like they're there in the scene with you. That was really important. I had never done that kind of writing. So that's something I got to learn through this process and through my collaborative writers. Like we set up a lot of scenes and dialogue and details. And I really learned like what that was like to write a scene as opposed to just like in the moment, as opposed to like looking back at a moment and telling what happened. So that was like really, really cool for me to learn that kind of writing. And then again, the writing of like the more visceral experiences, that was very new for me to get into like that level of detail, thinking about like, what does it mean? What does it mean to have a voice, right? And what does it mean to really tell the story in an artful way? And one of the things my literary agent would say to me, and she's such a talented writer herself, she's written like 6 New York Times bestsellers, but she would say like, trust your reader. You don't have to be so explicit. You don't have to explain every single thing, like really trust your reader. And so I went back and I just noticed all the times we were like, foreshadowing, or we would show something through a scene and then I'd have to like interpret, like kind of be explicit about what that meant to me. And just so I learned a form of writing that was far more nuanced and therefore I think more elevated. And so I'm so lucky I had the chance to work with like these two incredible writers.
Yeah. Yeah, speaking of that nuance and maybe giving credit to the reader, like my wife and I just watched the season 2 of Wednesday. You know, we love season 1, but like season 2, like they are so explicitly saying things plot wise, and I understand. I think some of the writing nowadays is like they're assuming people are on their phones, and so they have to spoon feed you so many story beats. Sometimes in back-to-back scenes, they're just repeating things, and it's just like, oh my God, this is some bad TV writing, but I think it's just more endemic to our attention right now, and that they're writing to that degree of audience, but it's just like they're not letting any nuance like speak for itself. They're just explicitly telling you various things, and it's like, ugh, this is annoying. I don't even want to watch season 3.
Yeah. And again, that was like exactly what I didn't want to do. I didn't want to be like overly prescriptive. I didn't want to like explain every single thing. I wanted there to be an element of poetry in what we were writing, right? And that, that the language felt really beautiful. And so, yeah, it was interesting because when I read my audiobook at the end, I did the reading for it. So it was like a 5-day process. That's the first time I had read the book end to end. And I've heard some people do that and they're like, you know, their first time they're like, oh, I didn't like my book. And I expected like maybe, you know, I'm very self-critical. So I expected I'd come out of that process and be like, you know. And truth be told, there were a number of typos, even in the final version, which drove me nuts. But I came out of that reading and I was like, you know what? I said everything I wanted to say. Like this truly came from my heart. And that's one more thing I'll just say is like, as I was writing, you asked, what did I decide to keep in or keep out? I would actually tune into my body and feel, does this feel aligned? Does this feel, is this a story I want to tell? And when it was, I would have this certain feeling in my body, kind of like, I don't know how to explain it exactly, but it was almost like this swirling energy or something that felt very aligned, almost like a straight, like energy going up and down my body. Do you know what I mean? Like that made me feel like, okay, yeah, this feels really good. This feels like the way I want to tell it or the story I want to tell. And so when I had that feeling, which is a somatic experience as opposed to an intellectual experience, then I knew like that was the way I wanted a scene portrayed or told.
Have any of your family members read the book?
Yeah.
How'd they react to it?
Different ways. You know, it's tricky because my parents, their English is not their first language, so they're not fluent. So it's, you know, taking time to go through and having to use a translation tool. And in some ways, I wish it was like translated first because you lose so much in translation. But my mom has said that, you know, some scenes are hard to read, so she's going through it slowly. But that when she gets to those parts, and I'm so grateful for her saying this, that she kind of puts down the book and she's like, okay, this is hard, but like, what do I get to learn from this? Right. So that I thought that's just been such a beautiful thing to hear and witness. And yeah, my sister, like one of my sisters didn't read it until the book came out. Another sister had chosen, I'd given both of them the option to read it early. And so my younger sister did read it early and was really, really supportive, you know, and even reminding me of certain things that happened. And she read it like as it was almost done, and then she read it again in its final version. And so she was really supportive and helped me think through like what I wanted to include, how to address it. You know, I decided that I was gonna like really sit down with my parents closer to the end of the process and explain. And they knew what I was doing all along, but I wasn't like super explicit about these are the things going in. So as I finished up the book, I went to Taiwan where they are, and I sat with them, and my sister came with me, was super, super generous in doing that. And we sat down and just really explained what was happening. And so it's something that it was scary, as you can imagine. But I would say my parents have like been really supportive in the end, even though it's been a hard thing to write about. So I appreciate that a lot.
Nice. Well, Jane, I want to be mindful of your time. And as I bring these conversations down for a landing, I always love asking the guest for a recommendation of some kind. It's just like anything you're finding cool and fun. For the listeners out there. So I would just extend that to you. What would you recommend for people out there?
Something to do or
it could be a brand of socks, a coffee, a fanny pack, surfing. It's totally up to you.
Okay, well, I would say what I said earlier, which is I think has been one of the most like cool healing process things I've done, experiences, which I've built into my daily life, which is if you are near a body of water, spend 5 minutes floating. Okay, and what that means is, first of all, you have to really relax to float, right? But if you're tensing up, you're not going to float. And then really just focus on your breath, clear your mind, and feel the support of the water as it embraces you. So that is something I am going to recommend.
Oh, that's amazing. And in Hawaii, the last time I was there, it was during humpback whale migration.
Yeah.
And you want to talk about floating in the water, going underwater. You can hear the whales singing underwater, which is the most magical thing in the world.
Oh my God, I just had that experience a couple weeks ago. Like it's whale season. So I went in. I couldn't see the whales. I could hear their songs under the water. And it was so magical. And then like a pod of 50 dolphins showed up. And I just got to swim with this pod of like 50 dolphins. It was so cool.
It's wild. Oh, cool. Well, Jane, this was so great to talk a little shop and get to celebrate your book and your memoir.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for carving time to do this.
I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Yes. Awesome. Thanks to Jane for stopping by to talk about her book. The name of it again is Like a Wave We Break. Show's Instagram handle is @Creative Nonfiction Podcast, and you can always hit up the club at welcometothepitchclub.substack.com and BrendanO'Mara.com. Why not? To sign up for the flagship Rager and to peruse for hot blogs. You never know what you'll stumble upon. Figure I can jump in with a dog update. I haven't done that in a while. Kevin's doing okay. She's not limping the way she was several weeks ago or even a couple months ago. She gets around. She's slow on walks, but it's better than no walks at all. She kind of has a doddering way about her now. She's old. She's an old German Shepherd, an old lady. But she's eating, and she can still somehow jump on our bed when she wants to, which I definitely don't encourage. Senior dogs can go from good to bad in like 36 hours, so I'm just enjoying my time with her as long as possible. A few months ago, I was feeling pretty bad about her health, but right now, she seems pretty content. Her tail wags. She still loves to go for car rides, and her bark is as loud as ever. Lachlan, his butt problems are still the stuff of legend. After he had a massive abscess on his left anal gland, lanced and drained about 6 weeks ago, had to go to the emergency vet for that one. That was fun. 6 hours later, they finally took him. I was delirious because I was there at night from like 8 at night till 3 in the morning. It was not fun. But the infection came back, and it's likely the poor guy has had like this low grade to high grade infection for a long time. Like anytime they're treating it, they're knocking out 99% of the bacteria, but that 1% hangs on and then just propagates, right? Never fully knocked out. He might need to have his anal glands removed since he's had chronic issues with those for years. That could be a good $5,000. Nice. Love that. Love that for our credit card points. Love it. In our emergency fund. We routinely have to wipe his ass every time he comes back from going to the bathroom so he doesn't smear poo all over blankets and furniture. We were very clearly terrible people in a former life and just plain awful in this one. And so this is our punishment. We will never be free. We will never be happy. Hank is fine. His heart issues seem okay. The medicine's working there. So he's on the path to heart failure, but he's not there yet. We just run a shelter of fucking derelict dogs here. Nobody is happy. My wife works so we can pay for the dog's care. That's it. This is not a great life, and we brought it on ourselves. We are more than halfway through our lives, and they have yet to begin. How to rebound from that? Fuck if I know. What are you doing? How are you doing? How are you hanging in? It's really difficult to keep the spirits up these days. There are some content creators online that help me realign, that when I think of their posture and how they act in alignment with that posture, I tend to feel better. You know, if I can rhyme with what they're doing, I don't know. I'm especially drawn to this vegan chef, Derek Sarno, on YouTube. He's written the cookbook Wicked Kitchen with his brother. He helped Whole Foods develop a lot of plant-based recipes and such. I don't think he's associated with them anymore, which is good because Whole Foods sucks. Anything Amazon touches turns to shit. Derek's posture is very relaxed and very kind. You know, he's neat and he cleans as he goes. He's obsessive about a clean space. He's orderly, and I'm not very relaxed. I'm certainly not the kindest in the world, and I'm less orderly than I am kind, so you can understand why I dig the guy. I can always feel if I've been on my phone too much, because I tend to feel rotten, like I'm starting to rot from the inside out. It's like when you step in dog shit and track it all through the house, and then it's like, oh, fuck. You got to start backtracking and cleaning and mopping and doing way more laundry than you had budgeted for. I've been trying to avoid the usual online trappings, trying to do more tactile things like zine making and collaging. You know, I've got a baller collage coming up that I'm looking forward to posting in March's Rager, but I'm happy to just make it. I'm cutting out a bunch of shapes and shit. It's kind of fun. You know, when I lean into that stuff, which keeps me from comparing myself to others and feeling that competitive envy, jealousy streak from surfacing, I tend to feel a bit more at peace, fleeting as that might be. To feel any semblance of peace, there's about a dozen things that need to happen on a given day for me to feel like really knitted together, which rarely happens, which leads me to feel a great sense of malaise come about 12:30, and it just feels like everything's gone to shit. I either eat too much or don't drink enough water, or I drink too much beer, or I don't exercise, or I don't read enough, or I drink too much coffee and I'm tweaked out and then I don't sleep. Ever just want to feel okay and you can't get there? I'm not asking for much. In the grand scheme, I know how good I have it. Like, I have a roof over my head, I've got food and clothes and clean water, last I checked. So what right do I really have to complain about anything? Yeah, I need to get to the bottom of this deep well of dissatisfaction, a seeming feeling of not contributing enough or not being enough. You know, enough is the key word. Like, how do we find it? I don't want to go into minimum effective dose range with all those tech bro weirdos. But is there an enough effective dose? A minimum effective enough? A minimum enoughness? That's the quest, man. So stay wild, and if you can't do, interview. See ya.